Welcome to Podkey Daily News, your fast brief on today's biggest pressure points. The biggest moves today are all about escalation and strain, missiles over the Middle East, tougher questions around Ukraine support, and fresh signs that the AI and chip boom is starting to shake investors instead of reassuring them. Iran's Revolutionary Guard launched multiple ballistic missiles at U.S. forces in the Middle East, and U.S. Central Command says the missiles were intercepted. That matters because it marks a sharp step up after a relative lull, and it lands right as indirect diplomacy is still limping along through intermediaries. At the same time, U.S. and Saudi forces carried out precision strikes on Iranian-aligned militia targets in eastern Iraq, which shows both sides are still mixing military pressure with back-channel signaling. The immediate risk is miscalculation. The next thing to watch is whether any side moves from proxy and limited strikes toward direct, openly claimed retaliation. A big obstacle to any deal is inside Iran itself. Ultra-hardliners, a vocal minority, are pushing revenge and total refusal to engage the U.S., while pragmatists want to turn battlefield leverage into diplomacy and sanctions relief. Funeral crowds chanting revenge, reports of a rogue IRGC-linked ship attack in the Strait of Hormuz, and questions around the Supreme Leader's visibility have all made that power struggle more unstable. On the U.S. side, Trump added to the pressure in a Fox News interview by threatening to bomb Iranian infrastructure, including power plants, bridges, and a site he called Pickaxe Mountain, if Iran keeps advancing its nuclear ambitions. So the picture right now is public threats, unofficial channels, and a real chance that hardliners acting outside formal approval could wreck any negotiation. Trump and Netanyahu are publicly aligned on blocking Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, but strategy and timing are clearly under strain. Israeli expectations for a stronger response are colliding with U.S. political and practical limits, which makes coordination harder in the Israel-Iran theater. That friction also showed up during Zelensky's Washington visit. He pushed hard for Patriot interceptors to counter Russian ballistic attacks, and Trump signaled a notable shift by approving a U.S. license for Ukraine to produce Patriot systems domestically and by praising Ukraine's long-range strikes. But there's still a gap between signaling and delivery. Zelensky also said Russia shared satellite imagery of U.S. Gulf facilities with Iran, a claim Trump publicly dismissed while saying he'd ask Putin about it. The practical takeaway is that Ukraine may have more rhetorical support than it did before, but timelines, inventory, and follow-through are still uncertain. In Japan, a shallow 7.1 quake in Kumamoto caused major damage, killed at least a dozen people, and left others trapped, including at a shopping mall. Thousands of self-defense force personnel were deployed for search and rescue, and Japan's strict building codes and nuclear safety rules appear to have prevented a much worse outcome. In Europe, huge wildfires near Bordeaux forced large evacuations as temperatures pushed into the low 40s Celsius under a heat wave alert. The broader warning from scientists is familiar but increasingly urgent. Fire seasons are starting earlier, lasting longer, and burning with more intensity. The AI trade is hitting a more skeptical phase. Google and other hyperscalers are posting strong AI-driven cloud growth, but investors are getting spooked by the scale of data center spending and the hit to free cash flow. Reports that NVIDIA is negotiating a $250 billion backstop tied to OpenAI's data center expansion only sharpen the concern that the build-out may be outrunning sustainable returns. At the same time, China's chip rise is adding another layer of pressure. CXMT's surge in value and reports that a Shanghai firm may be making progress on ultraviolet lithography tools suggest China could be moving faster than expected in advanced semiconductor capability. If those tool claims hold up, the impact could reach well beyond one company by reshaping equipment supply chains and intensifying tech competition. One more signal from inside the industry. DeepMind is shifting resources away from some standalone scientific teams, including AlphaFold-linked work, toward Gemini applications, which tells you where the money and urgency are going. There's also a quieter AI risk with immediate business consequences: hallucinated work product. TWC's Middle East thought leadership reports had fabricated footnotes and other AI-generated errors, and similar issues were found at EY, KPMG, and Deloitte. For clients, this is a trust problem more than a novelty story. If advisory firms can't control source integrity, the exposure runs from reputational damage to refunds and possible penalties. In China's auto market, foreign luxury brands are losing ground fast. Mercedes, Porsche, and Volkswagen all reported steep sales declines, as domestic players like BYD keep taking share and weak property markets cut into the luxury wealth effect. The strategic response is becoming clearer: more local for local production, less reliance on China as an export hub, and more planning around tariffs, software bans, and political risk. In aerospace, Boeing added about $280 million more in costs to the 747-8 Air Force One program, extending a long-running overrun problem on a project already around $4 billion. Even so, Boeing pointed to a record commercial backlog of more than 6,200 planes, which helped lift the stock despite the program's financial drag. Two domestic policy items stand out for direct household impact. The Trump administration plans to end a Medicare Part D subsidy after this year that now helps about 25 million people keep premiums down. Officials say the subsidy distorts pricing, but analysts warn many seniors could see monthly premium increases of roughly $11 to $20, with heavier pressure on vulnerable beneficiaries. Separately, the Supreme Court upheld the administration's move to end temporary protected status, putting many Haitian immigrants, including roughly 30,000 in Columbus alone, at risk of losing legal protection. Local leaders are warning about labor, family, and enforcement fallout as communities brace for uncertainty over ICE actions. In the West Bank, the UN says settler attacks are averaging about 6 a day, with reports that armed settlers beat residents while Israeli soldiers stood aside and made no detentions. Palestinian medics and witnesses also say Israeli forces are obstructing ambulances and limiting access to victims, adding to accusations of tolerance or de facto coordination. And in Washington, new research says Trump's net worth rose by about $2 billion in a year through stakes in companies that were also facing review by government officials, even as he says others manage his portfolio and the gains were market-driven. Why it matters is broader than one politician. Public concern around corruption remains high, and pressure for tighter investment and ethics rules is likely to keep building. That's the brief for now. Thanks for listening to Podkey Daily News. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.